The rain was not gentle. It was a cold, furious assault, a liquid sheet of glass shattering against the pavement, the buildings, and the thin fabric of her light pink dress. It plastered the worn material to her skin, revealing the impossible swell of her belly, the twin lives she carried within her like a fragile, sacred secret. The door, a slab of peeling green paint, slammed shut with the finality of a gavel. The sound echoed in the narrow, trash-strewn alleyway, a full stop at the end of the sentence that had been her life.
Lena did not pound on it.
She did not scream his name. She simply rested her forehead against the cold, splintered wood, a single tremor running through her exhausted body. The weight of the city, of her circumstances, of the two souls depending on her, pressed down with the physical force of gravity. Inside, she could hear the muffled sound of a television, the clink of a glass, the continuation of a life that no longer had room for her. Outside, there was only the roar of the storm and the frantic, panicked thrumming of her own heart. She pushed herself away from the door, her hand instinctively cradling her stomach, a silent promise to the children she had yet to meet.
She would not break.
Not here.
Not now.
The alley opened onto a street bleeding neon light into the puddles, turning the grimy water into abstract paintings of red and blue. Each drop of rain that struck her felt like a judgment. She was 25 years old, and she had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. Before we learn how she survived this night and who she would become, take a moment to tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. The world is vast, and stories like this unfold in every corner of it. And if you believe in the power of resilience, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of hope against all odds. Now, back to that rain-soaked night and the beginning of everything. Lena lifted her chin, the water streaming down her face like tears she refused to shed, and took her first step into the unforgiving storm. The city didn't know she was coming. It didn't care. But she was a force of nature in her own right, a quiet storm of maternal will, and she was about to collide with a world she never knew existed, a world of shadows and power hidden behind gates of iron and stone. Her journey into the heart of that world began with that single, defiant step away from the door that had closed on her past and toward a future she could not possibly imagine. She had nothing left to lose, which, in a strange and terrifying way, meant she had the freedom to risk everything for the chance at a new beginning. The wind howled, whipping her hair across her face, but her eyes were fixed on the distant, indifferent lights of downtown.
It had not always been this way.
6 months ago, there had been laughter in her small apartment, the scent of his cologne on a pillow, the gentle weight of his hand on hers as they dreamed of a future. His name was Marcus, and he was the quiet center of her world. His sudden death in a senseless construction accident had been the first crack in the foundation of her life. The grief was a physical thing, a constant ache in her chest. Then came the discovery, a miracle wrapped in sorrow. She was pregnant. The ultrasound revealed 2 tiny, flickering heartbeats, and for the first time since the accident, a fragile tendril of hope pushed its way through the dense soil of her despair. Twins. A boy and a girl, the technician had guessed. A legacy. A reason. But hope did not pay the rent. Her job as a waitress barely covered her expenses before, and as the pregnancy advanced, the long hours on her feet became impossible. Her savings dwindled, then vanished. Mr. Henderson, her landlord, had been patient at first, his sympathy as thin as the cheap paint on the walls. "A real shame about your young man," he'd said, his eyes lingering on her growing stomach. But his patience was a commodity with an expiration date. Soon, the polite inquiries became firm demands, then thinly veiled threats. "This is a business, Lena, not a charity," she had pleaded, promised to find the money, but he saw only a liability. Her grief was an inconvenience. Her pregnancy, a risk. Today, he had made his final move, casting her out with the callous efficiency of someone discarding a broken piece of furniture. It was the final, brutal fracture, and the life she knew crumbled into dust around her. The city at night was a predator. Its glowing eyes were the headlights of cars that sped past, splashing her with filthy water. Its growl was the distant wail of a siren. Its teeth were the jagged shadows in every alley and doorway. Lena walked for what felt like hours, her body a screaming chorus of aches. The babies were restless, their movements a constant, churning reminder of her responsibility. She tried a shelter first, a grim brick building with a flickering fluorescent sign. A weary-faced woman behind a pane of thick glass shook her head before Lena could even finish her sentence. Full up. Try again in the morning. The words were flat, devoid of emotion, a recorded message of rejection. She tried another, miles away, her feet now raw and bleeding inside her soaked shoes. The result was the same. The system, designed to be a net, had holes too large to catch someone like her. She was falling right through. She huddled for a time under the awning of a closed bakery, the sweet smell of day-old bread a cruel mockery of the gnawing hunger in her belly. People passed by, their faces illuminated for a moment by the glow of their phones, their umbrellas a protective shield against the world that was drowning her. They saw her, but they did not see her. She was part of the urban landscape, as ignorable as a discarded newspaper or a crack in the pavement. A profound, bone-deep cold began to set in, a cold that had nothing to do with the rain. It was the chill of invisibility, the realization that to the world, she had ceased to exist. She pressed her face against her knees, wrapping her arms tighter around her belly. "I'm here," she whispered to the two lives within her. "I'm still here. I've got you." It was past midnight when she saw it. She had wandered into a part of the city she didn't recognize, a neighborhood of silent, imposing mansions set back from the street behind formidable walls. And there, at the end of a cul-de-sac, was a house that was more like a fortress. It was a modern monolith of dark stone and black glass, surrounded by a high, wrought iron fence. Unlike the other homes, which were dark and sleeping, this one was alive with a soft, internal glow. A single, ornate gate stood as the only entrance. There was no sign, no name, just an aura of immense, untouchable power. Desperation is a powerful motivator. It silences the voice of reason and screams for survival. Lena didn't know who lived there. She didn't care. All she saw was a light in the storm. With the last of her strength, she stumbled toward the gate, her hand reaching for the cold, unyielding iron bars. She gripped them, the metal biting into her numb fingers. She saw a small, glowing intercom button and pressed it, her thumb trembling. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the drumming of the rain and the frantic beat of her own blood in her ears. She was about to turn away, to accept this final defeat, when a voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and devoid of warmth. "This is a private residence. You are trespassing." The voice was professional, detached, and utterly dismissive. It was the voice of a world she did not belong in, a world that had no place for her or her kind. But Lena had nothing left. She leaned closer, her voice a raw, broken plea. "Please," she whispered, the words swallowed by the storm. "Please, I just need shelter. Just for the night. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Then, the voice returned, colder than before. "Leave the premises immediately, or we will have you removed suddenly." The gate clicked and began to swing inward with a low, electric hum. Two men in sharp, black suits emerged, their faces impassive, their movements economical and dangerous. They were walls of muscle and tailored fabric, their expressions identical masks of professional indifference. They flanked her, their presence immense, suffocating. One of them spoke, his voice the same one from the intercom. "Ma'am, you need to leave." Now Lena looked from one stone-carved face to the other, her last ember of hope dying. She saw no pity, no humanity, only duty. She didn't resist as one of them took her arm, his grip firm but not yet violent. He began to steer her back toward the street, back into the rain, back to the nothingness that awaited her. It was over. But then, a new voice cut through the night, slicing through the sound of the storm with effortless authority. "Stop!" The voice was quiet, yet it carried an absolute, unquestionable power that made both guards freeze instantly. They turned, their postures shifting from dominant to deferential. Out of the shadows of the grand entrance, a man appeared. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a dark gray suit, holding a black umbrella that seemed to absorb the surrounding light. He moved with a liquid grace, an unnerving stillness at his core. As he stepped into the soft light from the gate lamps, Lena saw his face. He was Korean, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a mouth set in a neutral line that betrayed no emotion. He was dangerously beautiful, like a perfectly crafted weapon. He was Jin-Woo Kwon. Jin-Woo Kwon's eyes swept over the scene, taking in the two imposing guards and the small, drenched woman between them. His gaze lingered on Lena, on the worn pink dress clinging to her, on the proud, desperate angle of her chin, on the hand that never left her swollen belly. He saw not a nuisance, but a portrait of defiance. The guard stood at rigid attention. The one holding her arm released it as if it were hot iron. "Sir," the guard began. "She was trespassing. We were escorting her off the property." Jin-Woo did not look at his man. His focus remained entirely on Lena. He saw the exhaustion etched onto her features, the deep weariness in her eyes, but underneath it, he saw a flicker of something else. Something unbreakable. It was a quality he recognized, for he had forged his own life from a similar fire. He took a step closer, stopping just outside the circle of her fear. He spoke, and his voice was no longer the sharp command he had given his men, but something quieter, a low rumble that was almost gentle. "You are with child," he stated, his gaze dropping to her stomach. It was not a question. Lena could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. She met his eyes, expecting to see the same dismissal, the same cold pity she had seen all night. Instead, she saw a flicker of something. Curiosity? No, it was more than that. It was recognition. "Come inside," he said, the words simple, direct, and utterly life-altering. He turned and walked back toward the house without a backward glance, confident she would follow. The guards parted for her like the sea, their faces now unreadable masks of confusion and obedience. Lena hesitated for only a second, then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she walked through the gates, leaving the storm behind her as she stepped into the lion's den. The inside of the house was a shock to the senses. The air was warm and dry, smelling faintly of cedar and green tea. The roaring of the storm was reduced to a distant, muted whisper. The foyer was vast and minimalist, a cavern of polished black marble, dark wood, and strategically placed art that hummed with quiet, expensive energy. It was less a home and more a museum or a temple. An older woman in a simple, elegant gray dress appeared, as if from nowhere. She bowed her head slightly to Jin-Woo. "Mrs. Park," he said, his tone formal. "Our guest will need a room. And dry clothes. And food." He turned his attention back to Lena, who stood dripping on a priceless-looking rug, feeling like a stray animal that had wandered into a palace. "You are safe here," he said, his gaze intense. "You will be cared for. Rest." With that, he turned and disappeared down a long hallway, leaving her in the capable hands of the housekeeper. Mrs. Park's face, unlike the guards, was kind. Her eyes held a deep, maternal warmth that instantly soothed a raw part of Lena's soul. "This way, dear," she said, her voice soft. She led Lena to a guest suite that was larger than her entire former apartment. A fire was already crackling in a sleek, modern fireplace. A plush robe was laid out on a king-sized bed with crisp, white linens. Mrs. Park drew a bath, her movements efficient and comforting. For the first time that night, Lena's composure finally broke. As the warm water enveloped her, the tension, the fear, and the grief of the last months came pouring out. She wept silently, her shoulders shaking, mourning the life she had lost and overwhelmed by the impossible kindness she had just been shown. She didn't know who Jin-Woo Kwon was, or why he had helped her. She only knew that for the first time in a very long time, she was warm, she was clean, and she was safe. In the weeks that followed, Lena's life transformed. She lived in a gilded cage, a bubble of quiet comfort and absolute security. Mrs. Park cared for her with a gentle, fussing affection, preparing nutritious meals and ensuring she had everything she needed. The two guards, whose names she learned were Minjun and Sengho, became her silent shadows. Their initial hostility had evaporated, replaced by a stoic, unwavering protectiveness. She would sometimes catch them watching her from a distance, their expressions no longer dismissive, but respectful. A top obstetrician, a Dr. Chen, began making house calls, his visits arranged and paid for by her unseen host. He was calm and reassuring, confirming that despite her ordeal, the twins were healthy and strong. Her host, Jinwoo, remained an enigma. He was often absent, leaving before she woke and returning late at night. His business was a thing of whispers and shadows, a topic no one ever discussed. But when he was home, his presence filled the vast, silent house. They would sometimes share a meal, eating in a formal dining room big enough for 30 people. Their conversations were stilted at first, filled with long silences. He would ask simple questions about her health, about the babies. She would answer quietly, still intimidated by his power, still trying to understand his motives. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked one evening, her voice barely a whisper. Jinwoo paused, his chopsticks hovering over a bowl of rice. He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "Dignity," he said, the single word hanging in the air between them. "It is not a thing that should be begged for on a street corner. It should be inherent." In that moment, Lena began to see past the dangerous Mafia boss. She saw a man governed by a strict, personal code of honor, a man who understood suffering because he had likely known it himself. The birth came suddenly, 2 weeks before her due date, in the dead of night. It began with a sharp, insistent pain that stole her breath. Panic flared, but it was quickly extinguished by the seamless efficiency of Jinwoo's household. Mrs. Park was by her side in an instant, her calm presence a steadying anchor. Dr. Chen was summoned and arrived within 20 minutes, his medical bag ready. A room in the house had already been prepared, transformed into a state-of-the-art delivery suite. Everything was sterile, quiet, and controlled. Everything, except for the primal, chaotic force of life entering the world. Jinwoo was there. He didn't hover or interfere, but stood near the doorway, a silent, unmovable sentinel. His presence was a strange comfort. Through the waves of pain, Lena would open her eyes and see him there, his face unreadable, but his focus entirely on her. He was a fixed point in a world that was spinning apart. The hours blurred into an eternity of effort and exhaustion. Dr. Chen's voice was a calm murmur, guiding her, encouraging her. "You're doing wonderfully, Lena. You're so strong." In the final moments, as her world narrowed to a single point of excruciating effort, she felt a strength she didn't know she possessed. It was the strength of Marcus's memory, the strength of her own will to survive, the strength of the two souls fighting their way to her. Then a cry. Sharp, piercing, and utterly miraculous. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced, his voice filled with gentle triumph. But there was no time to rest. The second baby was coming. Lena dug deep, finding a hidden reserve of power. Minutes later, another cry joined the first, this one just as loud and full of life. "And a girl," the doctor said, smiling.
"Congratulations, Mama."
They're perfect, exhausted, overwhelmed, and flooded with a love so fierce it felt like it could remake the world. Lena finally let go, her last conscious sight being Jinwoo stepping out of the shadows and toward the sound of his new, impossibly small house guests. In the quiet days that followed, the sterile mansion began to feel like a home. The silence was now punctuated by the soft cries and gurgles of the twins, a boy she named Noah and a girl she named Chloe. They were her entire world, two perfect, tiny beings who had tethered her to the future. Lena healed, her body slowly recovering, her spirit soaring. Jinwoo's role in their lives shifted subtly. He was no longer just a protector, he was a participant. He would appear in the nursery in the evenings, his imposing figure looking almost comical next to the delicate, white cribs. The first time he held one of the babies, it was Chloe. Mrs. Park had placed the swaddled infant in his arms, and for a moment, the powerful Mafia boss looked utterly terrified. He held her stiffly, as if she were made of spun glass. Chloe, however, simply yawned and snuggled into the warmth of his expensive suit. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Jean Wu's lips. It was the first time Lena had ever seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face, chasing the shadows from his eyes. He started spending more time with them, watching her feed them, his expression one of quiet fascination. One evening, as she was rocking Noah to sleep, he sat in the chair across from her. "They are strong," he said softly. Like their mother, Lena's heart fluttered. "They have a safe place to be strong," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "Because of you." The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken emotions. Later that week, he found her on a balcony overlooking the city lights. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time. He turned to her, his hand gently touching her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "Lena," he said, his voice husky. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not demanding or passionate, but exquisitely gentle. It was a question, a confession, and a promise all at once. It tasted of safety, of respect, and of a new beginning that felt more real than anything she had ever known. She kissed him back, pouring all of her gratitude, her admiration, and her burgeoning love into that one simple act. The city that had once tried to break her now lay glittering at her feet, a silent witness to her triumph. She was no longer alone in the storm. She was home,